All right, let's take a look at another sign here. And the first thing I'll do before I introduce the grammar, the little grammar that we see in this little clause here, is I'll introduce the vocabulary on the whole sign. This first word here, 산불, I can break this down into san, which refers to a mountain, and it's actually, this is based off of probably one of the most recognizable characters in Hanja or in Chinese, which looks like this. And it's very recognizable because it's one of the simple things that actually looks like it's the meaning of the thing that it's describing. You'd sort of imagine this is a mountain that's sort of getting bigger here. Now, so this means mountain. Now, bur means fire. And what's interesting is if you put these two words together, you actually get mountain fire. But in English, I would never say mountain fire. Instead, what I would always obviously say is a forest fire. And it's interesting when I think about this, because if I think about forest fires that happen, and I think about where they might happen in America or in Canada, they actually happen in mountains. And so even though this idea of mountain fire is kind of funny to me to think about, when you think about it, actually it's true. Forest fires typically happen in sort of mountain regions. Now, this next word here, han, and you actually see this twice. Han is here and han is here. Both of those mean one. And it's specifically one in the sense where I'm counting something after it. So it's one of these and one of these. And I'll talk about this later, but I always find it funny that the spacing on signs is not always correct. And you'll notice there's a space here, and there actually isn't a space here. I'll mention that when I talk about the grammar in this sentence. Sungan means moment. And I might as well talk about, so this is just saying one moment, and 평생 means one's whole life. And the final word that we see here, if we take out the un and nun, because this is sort of more grammar, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but boku hada means to restore. And boku is the noun form of to restore or to recover, and that would just be restoration. And down here you see 산불 again, which means forest fire. Again, you could also translate it to mountain fire, but this is forest fire, which we already know, forest fire. And 조심하다 is a word that you see very commonly on signs to indicate that one should be careful about something. It means that because 조심하다 means to be careful, and 조심 is the noun form of that. So you typically see 조심 following something to say, be careful about this. So this is just be careful of. Be careful of. Now, before I actually talk about what these two things are doing in this sentence, we could already sort of understand the meaning of this entire thing. This is saying forest fires, 1 minute, 1 moment, restoration or recovery, a whole lifetime. And it's sort of an idiom that they're trying to describe, but if you break it down and understand it, what it's saying is it's possible that if you start a fire, it only takes a moment. It only takes a second of your life or a moment of your life to start a forest fire. However, fixing that forest fire takes a whole lifetime. And you can imagine that it takes a second to light a match, and one match could start a whole forest and burn down a whole forest. But planting those trees again and growing all those trees, well, that takes a whole lifetime. The one thing that I want to focus on in terms of grammar for this sign is the purpose of this and this in this sign. You probably, if you're a beginner in Korean, and even if you're an intermediate or an advanced learner of Korean, you're probably well aware of how this can be used in a simple sense. But another way that it could be used is to sort of indicate that there's two opposite ideas happening in the same sentence or in the same phrase or in the same clause. And that's actually what we're seeing here. I'm going to show you a very simple example that you could say using nun or un in the same sentence to indicate that you're referring to two opposite ideas. One thing you could say is, for example, 사과, which means apple. 사과는, maybe you can say 맛있고, and this is just, 맛있다 means to be delicious, and 사과 means apple. And here you see this nun. This is, ko is just sort of separating these two clauses. This is the first part of the sentence, and this next part will be the second part. And maybe instead of apple, I can say on the second part, 바나나는 맛이 없다. Now, what I'm doing here, again, sago is apple, banana is banana, and 맛있다 means to be delicious, and 맛이 없다 means to not be delicious. So what I have here is two opposite ideas in the same sentence, and I can indicate that I'm talking about two opposite ideas within the same sentence by putting nun on both of the subjects on each clause. And that's what we see here. And I don't have a predicating verb or adjective at the end of here. This is just sort of an idiom that doesn't actually, it's not a full sentence that I have here. But this is saying, and again, if we understand the words that I have in this sentence, it's saying, starting a forest fire, it takes one moment, and that's one idea. And the opposite of that idea is recovering that from that forest fire takes a whole lifetime. There's just one other thing I'd like to mention, and that's that this idea here that I was talking about with this space and this space. Now, han is a word on its own, and this han technically could be a word on its own. And as I said before, they both mean one. 순간 is a word on its own, and 평생 is a word on its own. Sometimes you get these words that when you combine them, they actually create a word after they're combined. So even though you could separate these and say one moment, and you could separate that, like in English, we have them as one word, or sorry, two words meaning one moment as two separate words. In Korean, the words 한 순간 and 한 평생 actually exist as words on their own. And that's what we see down here. 한 평생 actually exists as one word, and you don't see a space here because you don't need a space because this is actually one word on its own. Now, 한순간, as I said, is also actually a word on its own, and you actually wouldn't need this space here. And it's funny that they didn't include a space in this particular case, and they did include a space in this particular case. Now, it makes sense to say one moment, but it's a little bit strange to say one lifetime. And I asked a Korean person about this, why you would need to indicate one lifetime, because usually one person has one lifetime, they don't have another lifetime. And the Korean person just said, well, it's really just stressing that it's almost like a whole lifetime, where, as I said before, starting the fire or starting the forest fire is a moment, but recovering from the fire is a whole lifetime. Well, that was fun. I hope you learned a lot. Like our sign videos? You can see all of our Korean sign explanation videos by clicking the link here. We also have a ton of videos showing various aspects of Korean culture, tourist areas, cuisine, and everyday life. You can go there by clicking this link here. You can also subscribe to our channel by clicking this button.